I caught my husband saying he had to force himself to touch me, but my family's money made it worth it. So I destroyed his entire life, without him even realizing. I was born Elizabeth Montgomery, the heiress of the Montgomery real estate dynasty. My world was champagne brunches, designer wardrobes, and charity galas with mayors and moguls. Everyone expected I'd marry someone from the same gilded world, but fate had other plans. I met Jason Miller at a rooftop art exhibit in Manhattan. He wasn't part of the invite list, and I remember that clearly because he wasn't dressed like everyone else. While the men around me wore tailored suits and Rolexes, Jason had on a black button-down, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and scuffed boots like he'd just walked off a construction site. Which turns out, he had. He was installing lighting for the exhibit, not attending, not invited. But there was something about the way he looked at me, like I wasn't some porcelain heiress on display. He didn't care about my last name or the vintage diamond earrings I was wearing. He asked, "Is that wine any good or is it just expensive?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. From that night on, I was hooked. "You're different," I told him on our third date, when we snuck away to a small taco joint in Brooklyn, far from the paparazzi and penthouse parties. "You don't care who I am." "I care exactly who you are," he replied, brushing a stray hair from my face. "I just don't care about the label on your purse." Jason was everything my world wasn't. Rugged, simple, grounded. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens with a single mom and 3 brothers. He worked hard, really hard, and carried himself with a pride that was magnetic. To me, he was real, and real was addictive. But not to my family. "You're not seriously considering a future with him," my mother Evelyn hissed one afternoon, sipping her cucumber martini at our country club. "He doesn't come from anything, darling. He comes from decency," I snapped back. "From struggle. That means something." My father was more subtle, but even more calculating. "I've had our people run a background check," he said over breakfast one day. "He's clean, too clean, that's what worries me. He's playing a part, Elizabeth. They always are." I ignored them. I blocked out the whispers at galas and the disapproving looks from friends who suddenly found themselves too busy to meet for lunch. I was 26 and madly in love. I wasn't going to let my parents' elitism ruin something this real. But maybe I should have listened. Jason proposed to me under the same rooftop where we met. He'd rented it out, God knows how, probably maxed out 5 credit cards, and scattered red rose petals in a perfect circle around us. A string quartet played my favorite song, and he got down on one knee, holding a modest diamond ring that looked tiny next to my inheritance, but meant the world to me in that moment. "Elizabeth Montgomery," he said, voice shaking. "I may not come from your world, but I promise to spend the rest of my life building one with you. Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears. Happy ones. We married 6 months later in the wedding of the decade. Jason wore a custom tux. My gown was hand-stitched by Dior, and 800 guests watched us say vows in the most opulent cathedral in the city. I ignored the way my father refused to make a toast. I pretended I didn't see my mother's grim expression when Jason dipped me for the kiss. I was convinced that love had triumphed, convinced that I'd beaten the odds. Jason moved into my penthouse, and I told myself it didn't matter that he never offered to pay a single bill. I overlooked the way he started quitting jobs because the boss was an idiot, or how he suddenly needed access to the joint account for emergencies. I defended him every time someone hinted he was taking advantage. He's proud, I'd say. Just lost in this new world. Truth? I was the one lost, but I didn't see it yet. Not then. I still remember the exact words my mother said the night before the wedding, when she thought I was asleep in my childhood bedroom at the estate. "He's a nobody with ambition," she whispered to my father behind closed doors. "She thinks it's love, but he's just playing a role until he gets what he wants." I wanted to burst through the door, scream that she was wrong, but I didn't. Because part of me was scared she wasn't. Still, I married him the next day. The ceremony was a fairy tale. A cathedral draped in ivory silk, chandeliers glittering like frozen stardust, 1,000 white orchids lining the aisle. My dress, hand-sewn in Paris, floated like a cloud behind me. And Jason, standing at the altar in his tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, looked like the dream I'd spent years chasing. But even dreams cast shadows. When the priest asked him to read the vows he'd written, Jason fumbled with the folded paper in his jacket pocket. I didn't write anything," he chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "You know me? Can't sit still long enough to write poetry. But I love you, Liz. You know that. Everyone laughed politely. I forced a smile. It was our wedding day. I wasn't going to let a missed vow ruin it. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 came during the reception. My father had just given a surprisingly emotional toast, his voice cracking as he welcomed Jason into the family. Jason stood beside me, clinking his champagne flute against mine. Then he leaned in and whispered, "That old man finally gave in. I told you he'd crack." I laughed it off. I thought he was joking, but his tone had something behind it, something calculating. Still, I pushed the thought aside. Everyone had doubts on their wedding day, right? The honeymoon was in Bora Bora, a private villa over turquoise water. I'd arranged every detail, the flowers, the chef, the excursions. Jason was impressed, but also dismissive. "This is insane," he said, lounging in the infinity pool. "You know people actually live off ramen for dinner while we're over here eating caviar on a floating tray?" "I thought you liked it," I said, trying to read his face. "Oh, I do," he grinned, pulling me into the water. "It's just wild. Being rich must feel like playing God." Red flag number 3. Little things started to add up after we got back to the city. Jason refused to let me hire a driver for him, claiming it made him feel like a kept man. But within 2 weeks, he'd crashed my vintage Porsche trying to parallel park it. "Too jumpy on the brakes," he muttered. "I'll get used to it." Then there was the Amex. He'd never had one before. I added him as a secondary cardholder because he said he needed to buy something nice for my birthday. 3 days later, the statement came in, $14,678, designer sneakers, limited edition watches, a bottle of Louis XIII cognac. "Jason," I said carefully, holding up the bill, "this wasn't a birthday gift." He looked at me, then down at the table. "Okay, maybe I got carried away, but come on, Liz. You drop that much on brunch some days. Why is it a big deal when I do it?" Because it wasn't about the money. It was the entitlement, the expectation. Red flag 4. Blinking like a warning light, I refused to acknowledge. Instead, I defended him. Again and again. When my friends raised eyebrows, I claimed he just needed time to adjust to this new world. "He's never been exposed to this lifestyle," I'd say. "He's finding his footing." But behind closed doors, Jason had already started reshaping our life. Subtly. Strategically. He encouraged me to distance myself from my parents. "You don't need their approval anymore," he'd whisper as he stroked my hair. "You're a grown woman. We're building something of our own now." At first, it felt empowering, rebellious even, until I noticed he discouraged me from attending family events. He'd suddenly feel sick, or say he needed help with something at home, or that "they're just going to judge me again, Liz. Why put yourself through that?" I skipped Easter brunch that year, and my cousin's engagement party. Then came the business opportunities. Jason said he wanted to start flipping luxury condos. "You've got the contacts, I've got the vision. We'll be unstoppable." When I asked about a business plan, he brushed it off. "I don't do spreadsheets, I do results. Just trust me, babe." He needed a loan, a small one, he claimed, just to get started. I transferred $100,000 into a separate account in both our names. I told myself it was love, that this was what support looked like. That was red flag number 5. And yet, I loved him. I wanted to love him. Even when the man I fell for began to slowly disappear beneath the surface of someone I didn't quite recognize. I turned 30 on a Monday. We'd always talked about doing something big for that milestone. Maybe a week in Tuscany, wine tasting through Chianti and making pasta with locals, or renting a glass villa in the Maldives where we could swim with stingrays and toast my new decade under a sky full of stars. But 2 weeks before the big day, Jason came home late, again, and dropped the news over takeout Thai. "Babe, listen," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can't come with you. Something's come up at work. Big deal. Potential investor meeting, and if it goes well, we're set. I can't risk it." I remember just staring at him, chopsticks frozen midair. "You promised." "I know," he said quickly, grabbing my hand. "But this is huge, and you deserve the world, Liz. Once this takes off, I can give you that, finally. No more Elizabeth Montgomery, sole breadwinner. You won't have to carry us anymore." That last line stung more than I let show. He always made these promises, grand dreams, whispered with a kiss. But nothing ever really came from them. Still, I nodded and smiled and told myself it was just a delay, that next year we'd go even bigger. So I packed my bags and went alone. Santorini, one of my favorite places on earth. I'd booked a cliffside villa with a plunge pool that overlooked the Aegean. Whitewashed buildings, blue domes, pink bougainvillea climbing up the walls. It looked like a postcard come to life. But it wasn't the same without him. Everywhere I turned, I saw couples, laughing, holding hands, taking selfies on balconies. And there I was, sipping rosé alone at sunset, trying to convince myself that solitude was empowering. On the second night, I FaceTimed him. He answered after the third ring, shirtless and out of breath. "Hey, babe," he said, glancing away from the camera briefly. "Sorry, just finished a run." "In the apartment?" I asked, noticing the background, our living room. "Yeah, you know me, can't stay still." Odd, Jason hated cardio. "What's that music?" I asked. Something was playing faintly. A woman's voice, soft and sultry. He glanced over his shoulder, then back. "Oh, neighbor's TV. Thin walls, you know." "Right." I didn't push it. I wanted to believe him. But that seed of suspicion, tiny, nagging, started to grow. The next day, I texted to ask how the investor meeting went. No response. 6 hours later. "Sorry, babe, back-to-back meetings. We'll call you later." He never did. That night, I stared at the empty side of the bed and cried for the first time in months. Not because I was alone on my birthday, but because I was starting to feel alone in my marriage. Still, I kept up the act. I posted glowing photos on Instagram, me in a red maxi dress on a rooftop, the golden sun setting behind me, a cocktail in hand, comments flooded in. Goals, queen, living your best life. If only they knew. On my final day, I went to a local market and found a hand-painted ceramic tile. It had a Greek phrase on it I didn't recognize, so I asked the vendor. "It means, everything hidden eventually comes to light," he explained, smiling. I bought it immediately. That night, as I stood on the terrace looking out at the moonlit sea, I made a decision. I'd surprise Jason. My flight was scheduled for the next evening, but I changed it to the next morning. I wanted to be home before he left for whatever meeting he claimed to have. Maybe I just needed to see his face, confirm that I was being paranoid. Maybe a surprise would reignite what we'd lost. I didn't expect fireworks. I wasn't hoping for rose petals or champagne. I just wanted him to be happy I was home. Instead, I walked into a nightmare. The next morning, my driver dropped me off around 10 a.m. The doorman seemed surprised to see me. "You're back early, Mrs. Montgomery. Thought you were gone all week." I gave a tight smile. Change of plans. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal. My heart pounded louder with every floor. I opened the door quietly. Everything looked normal. No signs of chaos, no evidence of cheating, just our usual luxury living room. But something felt off. Then I heard it. Jason's voice, down the hall, in the bedroom, laughing. At first, I thought maybe he was on a work call, but then I heard what he said. Clear as glass, cruel as a knife. "She's the most hideous girl I've ever been with. I have to force myself to touch her. But her family's money? Worth every second." My ears rang. My heart didn't just break. It shattered, piece by jagged piece, into something unrecognizable. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop my bag. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I turned, walked into the kitchen, set down the ceramic tile from the market, everything hidden eventually comes to light, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. I would not let him see me broken. Not yet. I stood in the kitchen, unmoving, my fingers wrapped tightly around a crystal glass of water I no longer had any intention of drinking. Jason's voice drifted down the hallway again, carefree, boyish, animated. The exact voice I used to melt over when we first met. Now it felt like acid in my ears. "No, bro, I swear to God," he said between bursts of laughter. "She still thinks I'm obsessed with her. Sends me little selfies when she's on trips. Like, come on." I blinked. Not because I was shocked. No, I'd felt something was off for a long time. But hearing it aloud, in his voice, with that smirk woven into every syllable, that made it real. Solid. Carved into stone. Hideous. Force himself. Worth every second. I didn't cry. I didn't charge down the hallway. Didn't barge into the room and slap him or throw things or fall to my knees asking, why? I just stood there, letting the truth seep into every pore of my skin, letting the words brand themselves on my memory. In the background, I heard him chuckle again. She's so pathetic. I say jump, and she bakes me lemon squares. I fake a bad day, and she drops another 50 grand into our startup. I swear it's like being married to a rich Labrador. That one almost made me laugh. A rich Labrador, that was what I was to him. Loyal, eager, blind. The version of me he saw wasn't Elizabeth Montgomery, heiress of the Montgomery Empire, graduate of Columbia, board member of 3 nonprofits. No. To him, I was a wallet with feelings. The conversation ended with some low, muffled muttering, and what sounded like a flirty joke, probably from whoever was on the other end. A woman, I was now certain. Not a bro. Jason's laugh got softer, more intimate. Nah, she's not back till Friday. Got plenty of time. Might even get you to try out the sheets she paid for. My stomach turned, but my face didn't flinch. He didn't know I was here. He didn't know the game was over. I turned, walked silently into the guest bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. For a second, I wondered, is he right? Is that what he sees when he looks at me? Some grotesque parody of a woman? Something he can't stand to touch? But then I caught my own eyes in the mirror. No, that wasn't me. That was his projection. His manipulation. I was beautiful. Not just because of how I looked, but because of what I'd built, survived, and carried. I was the woman who held our entire life together while he played entrepreneur. I was the one who showed up. Every time he faltered, every time he messed up, every time he made me question my worth. Not anymore. I walked back into the living room and placed my bag by the door, exactly where he'd expect it to be if I'd just arrived. Then I quietly stepped back outside, pulled the door until it clicked shut, and took the elevator back to the lobby. The doorman blinked in surprise. Leaving again, ma'am? Forgot something in the car, I said smoothly. Be right back. But I didn't come back. Not right away. Instead, I went to a small boutique hotel across town and checked in under a fake name, Samantha DeWitt. My best friend in college used to use it as her hot girl alias at bars. It felt fitting. I sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. And I didn't block him. I didn't scream at him. Didn't send a rage-fueled text thread with screenshots and accusations. I simply opened a new folder on my phone. I named it Exit Plan. Inside, I started saving every file, every receipt, every bank transfer I'd made on our behalf. The wire transfer to his failed investment fund, the $6,200 watch I'd seen on his wrist just 2 weeks ago, the photos of my bruised self-esteem, the emotional neglect he'd dressed in pretty words. The next morning, I called a lawyer. High net worth divorce protection, I said, and I don't want him to know I've been here. He cleared his throat. This sounds serious. It is, I replied, and I'll need a private investigator. The man on the phone didn't ask questions. Just said, of course, Ms. Montgomery, I'll set up the team. And just like that, the woman Jason called pathetic had become the woman planning to eviscerate him without lifting her voice. I returned home that evening, just like I was supposed to. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. Jason opened the door, shirtless again, a lazy grin on his face. You're home early. I smiled softly, tilting my head. Surprise. He didn't hug me. Instead, he stepped aside to let me in, casually scratching his chest. You should have told me. I would have cleaned up. You know I like to keep you on your toes. He chuckled and closed the door. You're lucky I didn't have a girl in here or something. A joke. A joke. And I laughed. I actually laughed. Because if I didn't, I might have screamed. I played the part. The sweet, thoughtful wife back from paradise. I kissed him on the cheek and asked how his meetings went. He fed me the usual. Long days, stressed out, trying to make us proud. I didn't flinch when he mentioned work dinners. I didn't ask who he was on the phone with earlier. I didn't tell him I'd heard everything. Instead, I unpacked my bag slowly in front of him, placing the ceramic tile from Santorini on the shelf by our front door. He glanced at it. What's that say? It's a Greek proverb, I said smoothly. It means, everything hidden eventually comes to light. Jason raised an eyebrow and smirked. Deep. Isn't it? I replied, smiling sweetly. That night, I cooked his favorite, creamy mushroom risotto with a side of garlic-seared scallops. He devoured it like he hadn't eaten in days. You spoil me, he mumbled between bites. I like taking care of you, I said softly, brushing a kiss against his forehead. And I meant it. I did like taking care of people, but not him. Not anymore. That night, he reached for me in bed. I let him. I closed my eyes, and every time his hands touched my skin, I imagined slamming a courtroom file on the table. I imagined his face as he realized the empire he used me to build would be the very noose I'd tie around his neck. Over the next 5 days, I became perfect. I wore silk robes and kissed him goodbye at the elevator like a trophy wife out of a magazine. I left little notes in his briefcase. I texted him things like, "Miss you already, and dinner at 7. Can't wait to hear about your day." He soaked it all in. "Man, I got lucky with you," he told me over dinner one night, chewing a bite of filet mignon. "Seriously, my exes were all crazy, clingy, jealous. You're just chill." I sipped my wine. "You bring out the best in me." He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "You're rare, babe. Like a unicorn." A unicorn. I wondered what word he used for me with his mistress. Probably ATM. Or dog. But I just smiled, and I listened. Because Jason couldn't help himself. He talked when he felt powerful. He told on himself in breadcrumbs. One night, he let slip that he was thinking of getting into crypto with a friend. Said he might need to move some money around. I took note, then called my attorney the next morning. "Find out where that money's going. If he's laundering anything, I want it documented." "Yes, Ms. Montgomery." I began moving my assets, slowly and quietly. Pulled cash into a personal trust. Froze joint credit cards for fraud protection. Jason didn't ask questions. He was too busy living like a king to notice the walls narrowing around him. One night he asked, "Hey babe, do you think your dad would ever invest in my company? Like, as a silent partner?" I blinked slowly. "You want me to ask him?" "Yeah, just float the idea." "You told me you didn't want him involved." "Yeah, but I've been thinking." He took a sip of beer and shrugged. "Maybe I was being too proud. If I can get a foot in, we both win." I nodded. "I'll ask." I never did. Instead, I texted my father and said, "When I file for divorce, I'll need the board's support. You'll have evidence." He replied within 5 minutes, "Whatever you need." I never trusted him. For the first time in months, I felt powerful again. The plan was unfolding like a slow-moving storm. The silence was my weapon. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was preparing the kill shot. On the 5th day, a Friday, Jason left early, said he had a power lunch with investors. I smiled and kissed him on the cheek, placed a protein bar in his bag. He walked out whistling, texting someone. Her, probably. At 10:03 a.m., I filed the papers. At 10:07 a.m., my attorney froze his business accounts. At 10:22 a.m., the private investigator dropped a file on my desk with photos of Jason and his mistress at our condo, in my bed. At 10:26 a.m., Jason started calling. 1 missed call, then 2. By 12 o'clock p.m., he'd called 26 times, and I hadn't answered a single one. The morning after I filed for divorce, the world was quiet. Too quiet. I brewed Jason's favorite coffee blend, hazelnut dark roast with a splash of oat milk, and set it on the kitchen counter just like I always did. I even left a post-it note with a heart drawn on it. He didn't know yet. Not really. The man had 26 missed calls to me, but he was still clueless. He thought I was being dramatic, maybe upset over something dumb. Maybe I saw a text. Maybe I was just on my period. Because that's how Jason thought. He underestimated everything that wasn't about him. He came home late that evening, noticeably nervous, fiddling with his phone, his hair disheveled. I was in the living room, lounging in silk, a glass of wine in one hand, and a thriller novel I wasn't really reading in the other. "Hey, babe," he said cautiously, setting his keys down like he was trying not to wake a sleeping animal. "Jason," I smiled without looking up. "Dinner's in the oven." He blinked. "Oh, you're okay? Why wouldn't I be?" He scratched the back of his neck, confused. "I was just trying to call you earlier. You didn't pick up." "Oh, Phone was on silent. I took a long bath and kind of unplugged. He smiled, visibly relieved. Right. Self-care. That's good. I got up and kissed his cheek, the same cheek he used to rest against my chest when he pretended to love me. I made lemon chicken with asparagus. Thought you could use something healthy after all those work lunches. He chuckled nervously. You're seriously the best. I know. We sat at the table like any other couple, except I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his executioner. The man didn't realize his business accounts had been frozen, that the car he drove to his meetings was legally in my name, that his laptop had been quietly cloned by a forensic tech 4 nights ago while he was passed out from too many craft cocktails. He didn't know the woman he mocked as a rich Labrador had spent the last 120 hours dismantling his entire world. He didn't know that I'd found her. The mistress, Claire. Mid-20s, platinum blonde, plastic lips, and an Instagram feed filled with captions like, high-value women don't chase. Except she did. She chased my money, my home, my husband. And soon, she'd be the only one left holding him. Jason talked all through dinner, like everything was normal. I'm thinking of pitching that new crypto project to a few VCs. There's a guy in LA who, I smiled sweetly. Sounds risky. He nodded, stuffing another bite of chicken into his mouth. Yeah, but high risk, high reward, right? You've always liked gambling. That made him pause, just for a moment, but then he brushed it off, too self-assured to think it meant anything more than a joke. After dinner, he poured us each a glass of whiskey and sat beside me on the couch. You've been amazing lately. I really appreciate you, Lizzie. That name? Lizzie. He used it when he wanted something. I clinked glasses with him. What brought this on? He smiled and looked down at his glass. I don't know. Sometimes I forget how good I have it. I let that hang in the air for a moment before I said, and what do you think you've done to deserve it? His brow furrowed slightly. What? I continued calmly, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. You say I'm amazing, but what have you actually done to earn someone amazing? He laughed, awkward and off balance. Where's this coming from? I turned to face him, dead in the eyes. Just curious. You ever think about what it takes to keep someone like me? Jason stared at me like he'd just noticed I had fangs. Then, in true Jason fashion, he smiled like it was a game. Lizzie, is this like some sexy psychological thing? I didn't answer. Because at that moment, my phone lit up on the coffee table. A message from my attorney. Claire has been served. Footage delivered. She signed the NDA in exchange for dropping her claim to any gifts he purchased with your assets. Jason leaned over to peek. Who's that? Just a reminder, I said, setting the phone down. Tomorrow's a big day. What's tomorrow? You'll find out. He gave a weird little laugh. Okay, now you're scaring me. Good. I brushed his cheek and whispered, Go to bed, babe. You'll need your strength. He hesitated, but eventually wandered off toward the bedroom. I stayed on the couch and stared out the window at the moonlit skyline. The city below sparkled like 1,000 tiny secrets waiting to rise. The next morning, he'd wake up to a life he didn't recognize. His bank account, empty. His investors, gone. His mistress, vanished under a legal agreement. His image, shredded across legal filings. Jason didn't notice I was gone at first. He was too busy sleeping in, thinking it was just another morning in his designer life with his trophy wife and his double-shot espresso machine humming in the kitchen. Only, this morning, there was no espresso. No perfume lingering in the air. No breakfast sizzling on the stove. No Elizabeth. I'd left while it was still dark, quietly, with everything I owned already moved out the day before into a luxury penthouse under my maiden name. The place had a skyline view, a private elevator, and not a trace of him in it. At 9:07 a.m., he called me. Missed call number 1. By 9:18, he'd called 4 more times. I imagine he was pacing the apartment, pulling at his hair, checking the garage where my car used to be, probably opening drawers, looking for signs of a robbery. By 10 a.m., he'd figured it out. Because that's when the email hit his inbox. Subject: Official notice of divorce proceedings. Attached were documents prepared by the best family law firm in the state. A list of frozen accounts. A breakdown of asset reallocation. A notification of a restraining order against both Jason and Claire. Because yes, I found out she'd moved in 2 days ago while I was out of town. Classy. At 10:12 a.m., my father's company board received an anonymous tip, complete with time-stamped audio files, of Jason discussing potential embezzlement, fraud, and plans to leverage his stupid wife's family name for fake investor credibility. At 10:17, Jason was escorted out of the company's downtown office by 2 security guards. He wasn't even allowed to grab his ergonomic chair, the one he always bragged about cost $3,000. By 10:22 a.m., I received a voice message from him, the first of many. Lizzie, okay, listen, we need to talk. I don't know what this is, but you're being emotional. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Just please call me back. Nope. At 10:31 a.m., his company card declined at a gas station. By 10:42 a.m., Claire called him and hung up immediately after learning what I'd done. Her Instagram, wiped clean, of course. At 11:04 a.m., Jason showed up at the lobby of my new building. But the doorman, Marcus, God bless him, stopped him cold. You're not on the guest list, sir. Jason, ever the charming manipulator, smiled. My wife lives here, Elizabeth Montgomery. Marcus didn't flinch. No Montgomerys listed. Jason blinked. That's impossible. No, sir. And if you continue, I'll have to ask security to escort you out. Jason stood there for a few seconds, stunned, as if the world was turning upside down and he had no seatbelt. He tried calling me again and again. By noon, he'd called me 26 times. I sat on a plush velvet sofa with a view of the skyline, sipping a lavender matcha and listening to each voicemail like it was a podcast. Elizabeth, come on. You can't just disappear. What are you doing? You're being crazy. Okay, I get it. You're mad. But can we just talk like adults? I love you, okay? I said some stupid things. I didn't mean any of it. You know me better than anyone. Please, please, Lizzie. You don't know what you're doing. This isn't just about money. We're a team, remember? Don't do this to me. I paused that one, replayed it. Don't do this to me. The audacity. He thought I was hurting him. As if I hadn't spent 5 years of my life slowly dying inside, watching him lie, manipulate, degrade, and deceive me, all while smiling for our couple's holiday cards and clinking glasses with my parents at charity dinners. As if he wasn't the one who did this to me. The final voicemail came at 12:43 p.m. Okay, you win. I don't even care about the money. I need you. No one else gets me like you do. You're the love of my life. I'll do anything. I swear to God, Lizzie, I'll be better. I saved it. I never replied. Instead, I texted him one final message. Next time you want to use someone for their money, Jason, make sure they're not smarter than you. Delivered. Read. No response. Because there was nothing left to say. I turned off my phone, leaned back into the velvet, and felt the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years.